Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Good morning, and you're very welcome to today's Signpost webinar. We hope you are keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from today. The Burren and Aran Islands are among Ireland's most unique and treasured landscapes, where farming and nature have shaped each other over thousands of years. And today, new technologies such as GPS collars are helping farmers manage livestock in ways that support both productive agriculture while protecting these special landscapes. And joining us today to tell us more about these technologies and the Burren-Aran CP area as part of the Acres programme, we have joining us today is Joanne O'Connell, who is the Acres Burren-Aran CP team project manager. We have Aoife Forde, who's the project agriculturalist. And we also have our own Mícheál Kelly, who's scheme support specialist with Teagasc. Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to the webinar today. Great interest in this topic. Maybe Joanne, starting with you, first of all, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your own background and how you got involved in this project.
Sure, yeah. So I'm actually an engineer, Mark. I'm only moonlighting occasionally as a project manager, but I live in the area. And when the Acres scheme started 4 years ago, Dr. Brendan Dumpridge decided to step down, so I took over his role as project manager. But that's why Aoife is on the call with me, because I'm not a farmer. So any of the technical questions can definitely be directed to Aoife.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming along and joining us, Joanne. And actually met Brendan there only a few weeks ago, so it was nice to bump into him. A great advocate for the Burren and that general part of the country. And Aoife, could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the project?
Yeah, so I actually am farming here in the Burren region itself. So I am the project agriculturalist for the Acres Burren-Aran team. And in a previous life, I was actually a dry stock advisor for Teagasc based in Athenry and Kilrush. So yeah, just working a little bit closer to home now and farming within the same area I'm working in as well.
Great. And Mícheál, you're going to be helping us with questions later on?
Yeah, definitely. Look, there's plenty of interest in this topic. It's nice to discuss the great work that's been done in the Burren region and on the Aran Islands. So just to direct everyone there at the bottom of the screen to send in their questions through the question and answers function. And I'll be going through them. We'll attempt to answer them all live. I'm sure there'll be plenty.
Great. Thanks, Mícheál. Looking forward to those questions and our discussions afterwards. So looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, Gar míle mágad, Mark. Agus tá fáilte do gatainna a bhíar an call seo. Is Mícheál Joanne O'Connell. I am, like Mark said, the Acres Burren-Aran CP team project manager, and I also have Aoife Forde with me on the call for any technical questions people may have. So I'm just going to give you a presentation on the collars, cattle and conservation in the Burren and Aran Islands. I'm also sneakily going to put in some talk about goats, but they didn't begin with C, so I left them out of the title. So the presentation itself is about 35 to 40 minutes. I'm going to run through the Acres Burren-Aran zone, where we are, what we've done and what we're hoping to do, I suppose, over the next while. I'll run briefly through the full list of the landscape actions and then focus more on the targeted grazing and virtual fencing, which we have been using down here in the Burren and the islands. So we've been using goats on the islands and cattle in the Burren with the virtual fencing technology, and then I'll summarise it at the end. Just to say, the scheme is funded under the National Exchequer and the EU, and thanks to the department for having the trust in our team, I suppose, to be the locally led team on the ground. To the advisors who go out and score, hail, rain or shine, you guys are probably baking at the moment out there all summer, and they go out and they score all this land, which gives us this data to be able to work with. My CP team here, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. And all this data that I'm going to present here today is theirs. I'm just presenting it for them. And last but not least, the farmers, because without them, none of this would be possible and we wouldn't have the Burren. So the Acres scheme, I suppose, a huge amount of land comes under the results-based approach. And this is the first of its kind that has been rolled out nationally. So hats off to the department for taking the plunge on it. Between the CP areas, acres general, and the commonage, there's over 1 million hectares of land that is scored across the country on an annual basis. The area is divided into 8 different CP areas that you can see here on the left, and they are managed by 5 different teams, of which we are one. So we are just over here with the Aran Islands out in Galway Bay and the Clare and South Galway areas of the Burren, which is run by our team. So just a little bit more about the area and the team itself. The CP zone is divided into 3 regions. We have about 140 participants on the Aran Islands. We have our office on the Aran Islands, and that's run by Joanne O'Connell, who is based out on the islands. And then closer into the mainland, we have about 627 participants in the Clare Burren area, which would have been the old Burren programme area. And then we've added on about 530 farmers from the South Galway area, which reaches all the way over to the Octies, which meets the next zone. So in total, there's about 94,000 hectares in the zone, of which about 79,600 hectares of that is farmed, and that's from the CSO figures. And we have just less than 1,300 participants with just less than 60,000 hectares of scored land, which is about 75% of the farmed land. So we have a huge amount, I suppose, of the farmed land within the zone comes under the scheme. Just to say, in all areas, in all the zones, there were previous agri-environmental schemes, but in our area as well, Aran Life and Burren-Aran was on the Aran Islands since 2014, and much of that team is still with us and operating that scheme out there. And then on the Burren area itself, we've had Burren Life, Burren Farming for Conservation, and the Burren programme, and that's what we've largely tried to bring the learnings from that scheme into the current Acres programme. So Burren programme was arguably the first locally led agri-environmental scheme in the country. So we're just trying to continue on that experience within this current scheme. So when we were doing our local action plan at the beginning of the scheme, we looked at the zone in its entirety. And obviously it's got a huge amount of ecological, hydrological and cultural significance. The top image there just shows the 29 different SACs that are in the area. It's about 40% of the zone is under some sort of designation, and 78% of the SACs in the area are farmed by our participants. This middle image then just shows the water bodies. There's a clear hole where the burn is because it's all underground, but just because it's underground doesn't mean it's not important. We still have 3 high status objective water bodies and lots that are at risk and that need help as well. And from a cultural heritage point of view, Tim Robinson famously said that it was a vast memorial to bygone cultures. And this bottom image here just shows the amount of sites and monument records, or field systems as they're known in the area, that cover our zone. So it's about 25% of the land is under some sort of archaeological protection, which is probably more than all the other zones put together. And I suppose it's that tradition of farming for the last 6,000 years that's here in the Burren that has made the Burren the Burren. And if you take nothing else from today's call, that's what I really want to say, that tradition of that reverse transhumance, which is a fancy way of saying bringing the animals up to the winterage for the winter period and down to the lowlands for the summer, is what grazes out that old grass and allows for that species-rich grassland, which the Burren is so famously known for. During the summer to floral. So the Burren programme itself, I suppose, and Burren-Aran, a lot of the advantages of it was that it would do the paperwork for the farmers. So under all these designations of the 3 ecological, hydrological or archaeological, a lot of the work, I suppose, that needs to be done, the team could do the paperwork for the farmer, and that's why it was so successful. And I suppose the main pressures for all of these different elements are linked to grazing issues or to agricultural or tourism. So when we were doing our local action plan in the beginning, we very much based, I suppose, how we would increase grazing on the area. And that's what the Burren programme had also found. So the main reason for the Farm I1 scores, which would have been the Burren programme scorecards, the main reason for increase in scores was because of better grazing or scrub control. And when we look at the data that we're getting from acres to date, it's the same. So when we were writing our local action plan, we very much focused it around having better grazing and reducing encroaching scrub to allow that species-rich grassland to flourish. So then roll in the acres scheme. And as we know at this stage, the field scoring, the MPIs and the landscape actions are the three main elements that come under acres. The field scoring, like I said, is carried out by the advisors in the summer period, and this is an assessment of the environmental condition of the habitat itself. The higher the score, the higher the payment, and this score is what generates the area-based payment for the farmer themselves. If there is an issue with the scorecards, they can always apply for non-productive investments, and these are actions to help improve the score. They come under a number of different headings, but they're largely focused, I suppose, at being able to allow the farmer an action to improve the score for the next year. The window for MPIs is currently open, so if there are any farmers on the call, you've got till the 14th of October to get those actions in, and it may be the last round of MPIs in the scheme. So if there is something you're hoping to do, please do it now. The final part of the scheme was the landscape actions. These are larger scale or specialised actions that have a landscape benefit. They also help increase the score, but they're done by the CP team. They're applied for by the CP team for the farmers themselves. And these again come under different headings, which I'm just going to go through now. And again, the landscape actions this round may be the last, especially for tranche 1 farmers. So now is the time to get your interest in. So just to show what we've been getting, I suppose, so far, and the data that we've been getting from all this work that the advisors have been doing. Across the zone, this is just the Burren and South Galway area. We have close to 17,000 cards across the entire zone. And you can see here the large area of blue in the middle, they're the winterage cards. There's actually only 1,400 of them, but they cover about 30% of the area because the average size of a winterage card is close to 14 hectares. Whereas we have close to 12,000 of the grassland cards. They only cover about 45% of the area, but the average size of a grassland card is about 2.3 hectares, so a lot smaller. There are a number of other smaller cards as well, but largely I suppose our zone is made up of winterage and grassland cards. Out in the Aran Islands, they chose to use the grassland card because it more closely aligned to the cards that they had in the previous schemes. So there's about just under 3,500 grassland cards, and there's a few coastal grassland cards as well. So the scores we've been getting so far, you can see that it impressively is normally distributed. The average score across the Clear Galway area for the grassland card is about a 4. And what this essentially is telling us is that we have a lot of farms that are on the less than 4 improved agricultural grassland score, and a number that are in the higher end of the scale with the species-rich grassland, but largely the scores are generally around the middle, around the 4 or 5. The grassland scores for the Aran Islands then is impressively the other way. Anything less than a 5 is quite unusual out in the Aran Islands, and this just demonstrates the species richness of the area, which the islands are so well known for. So the winterage scores then, just to compare, they all do score quite highly as well. The ones that are less than 0 there, you can score negatively on the winterage card if you accumulate a number of negative points. And that's what that less than 0 is down at the bottom. So the average scores for Clare and Galway across the cards for the grassland would be the lowest, with the scrub woodland being the highest. But aside from being the payment or allowing us to calculate the payment, allowing the department to calculate the payment for the farmers, it also gives us details on things that we can fix. So like grazing levels, threats and pressures of damaging activity or water quality issues, invasive species, or where encroaching scrub and bracken and millennia levels are. And I suppose I've just put 2 slides here just to show how we're using this data. So this is just a targeting for the landscape actions. These are all the private or winterage or peatland fields that are greater than 20 hectares that had any of the 4 undergrazed categories ticked. So there was a total of 189 fields across just over 7,500 hectares, which we put in our database for farmer engagement. It's about 115 herds. So we had called these farmers individually and asked them if they were interested in doing the collars, which I'll discuss later, to be able to allow them to graze these areas better because they had been marked as being undergrazed. And similar for the islands, this is the high extent of spreading immature scrub or the high cover of bracken. Both of these areas are approximately 25 herds each, and they take up about 42 of the fields for scrub and 35 for bracken. But this is, I suppose, how we can use the data to be able to target actions for these farmers in these areas. So the landscape actions then, this is what I suppose as a CP team we are using to help. They're these larger or specialised actions with a landscape benefit. They're drawn up by the CP team. The Annual Works Plan 3 is currently open, possibly until the end of November. So do contact the team if you have any interest in doing anything. And so far we've put in about 182 LA plans have been submitted by the team for our participants over the first 2 Annual Works Plans. So a full list of them is also on our website. Sorry, I flicked through that quickly. acresburnaran.ie/landscape action, or you can just contact the team if you have any interest. So the landscape actions, so there's 68 different landscape actions. I'm not going to go through each one, but they're divided down into 4 different headings. And the most relevant ones, I suppose, for our zone under habitat and wildlife support would be full wall rebuild, which is funded at a higher rate than the MPI, which is just for repair. Lesser horseshoe bat roosts, which we are targeting farmers around the Cool Park area, which has known maternity roosts. Scrub and track is another section. I suppose for the landscape actions, scrub is being dealt with the machine if it's under a landscape action. And scrub is generally beneficial for biodiversity, but in an area where it's overtaking species-rich grassland, that's where it becomes an issue, and that's where we're targeting. But it's not possible on every site. And track has been one of the most beneficial things that came out of the Burn programme to allow farmers access into different areas to be able to get them to graze it. Invasive species, thankfully, is not such a huge issue down here, but we do still have some, especially down around the Alley River area, down in Doolin. So this is Japanese knotweed, and Gunnera would be the 2 main species that we would have that we will be individually calling farmers. We've already done 2 invasive species training days, and we'll be including more plans in this round. And hydromorphology then is a fancy word for water actions. Largely, we don't have a huge amount of peatland here. A lot of the peatland restoration actions come under this heading. But largely, we would be using it for, like this is shown in the image here, this is a spring catcher or a water retention structure in a karst landscape. And this is just to be able to protect these springs and provide water, which obviously in this dry weather is becoming more and more important. And also ponds, either lined ponds or unlined ponds in the area come under this heading, and any acres farmers that are interested in putting these in can contact the team. Another part, I suppose, of the landscape actions is the training, because a lot of these actions are more specialised, and to be able to train the farmers on how to carry out the action and why to carry out the action, there's a 3-hour paid training is also available. So we've carried out a number of these already to do with the virtual fencing that I'm going to discuss later, and also invasive species. It's mandatory to do the training to carry out the action. And like I said, it may be the last round for T1 farmers, so do contact us if you have any interest. So just to talk then about the actions themselves. So the first one is targeted grazing, which we used out in the Aran Islands. We used goats on scrub. Scrub has always been, I suppose, an issue out on the islands, and traditionally goats would have been kept possibly by each farmer out there to eat the scrub that the cattle didn't want to eat. Even when you are cutting the scrub out here, which would have been done with the other schemes, the fields are so small and there's limited area to put the brash on it that we needed to start thinking of a different way of doing it. And going back to the old ways is always, or can always sometimes be the best. So traditionally goats would have been kept and we wanted to go back to that. So there's new technology in virtual fencing. These are specific goat collars, which come from No Fence. There's other providers as well, but No Fence is just one of them. And this is the one that the farmer themselves had used out there. But this allows them to track and not have to fence the goats in, temporary fencing or otherwise. It can reduce herbicide and then means that there's less brash, like I mentioned earlier on, in these small fields. So in Annual Works Plan 1, we put in a number of actions for a trial. We were using between 4 and 10 goats for 60 days, and we were targeting between April and June with the idea being that the farmer could go in and mulch the area in the winter, and then that the goats could come in and eat the new growth between April and June. And this is how we felt would work best. And the cost of that is €1,768 per site. So how it actually went then, the farmer purchased 5 collars from No Fence. He had 4 goats and a kid in 0.265 of a hectare, or just over an acre. And they went in and they defoliated the areas so they can mulch it in winter. So the area was actually quite overgrown, but it was adjacent to other species-rich areas. So we felt it was worthwhile. And he went in and was able to have the goats eat down a lot of the vegetation early on. So this is a photo that was taken in October of last year. And if you just keep your eye on this boreen here at the back, you can see that the area has a lot of bracken and a lot of briars, and it really is pushing out into the field. And when we went back in May, this is this same boreen up here. They had eaten down a lot of that new growth. And it just means now the farmer can see where to cut and where to go in next winter and to cut back this old growth. So next summer, if he carries out the action again in this field, he'll hopefully be able to remove the scrub without ever having to deal with the brash. So I'm just going to...
So we're here.
I'm just going to pause that for a second. I'm just going to stop talking for a second. We went out and took a video with Fionn, the farmer. It's about 3 minutes long, so I'm just going to play that now.
On the Aran Islands with Fionn, who carried out the targeted grazing of goats action on his encroaching scrub on his land to restore and enhance the species-rich grassland of the islands, which they're so famously known for. So I know in the Burren there's been a lot of conversations about using these musical cows to try and graze the area in the Burren, but how does the technology actually work?
It works through a GPS system. So it shoots from the collars, and then you set the parcels on your phone. So just pin down the points you want. I found a 2-meter exclusion zone outside of the parcel works really well. So they can go right up to the walls, clear back any scrub and brush and ivy that's along the walls, and then that gives them that clearance area to get right up to it. So yeah, it works really well, easy to change. So if a section is not being eaten, or you find that the sound alarms are going off too often, you just click the phone, just pull the pin out another meter, and it takes about 15 minutes to update that, and it's good to go.
And you found the technology worked okay, and the fencing and being able to see them on your phone and everything was okay?
Yeah, it was nice to be able to just kind of keep an eye on them when, off the digital version, and then seeing the map and how they were moving and keeping an eye on them that way. So yeah, it really worked great, and it's nice to be able to integrate technology into the old ways too, because it was noticeable that they were missing from the land, that the ivy and the scrub was coming back pretty quick. So, and then obviously it reduces the herbicides and everything then on top.
So now that we're in the scrub, Fionn, what sort of vegetation, I suppose, are the goats actually eating in the area, and what kind of an impact do you see them having on a field like this long term?
They tend to go for the nice green easy stuff first, so that's why it's important to keep them in there for a longer period before they move on again. So you see here they've gone through the briars and the blackthorns, and they have tunneled their way into the centre of these big bushes and are just trampling it down, pinning it back, and clearing away any scrub. So then I can come along once it's cleared back, and I can mulch or trim it away, and allow for the grass to come through then and maximise the fields. Like above now, they're just on the edge of the border I've drawn. So beyond that, I have maybe 2 meters of a grace kind of area, and then they're tackling the ivy there really well, and it allows you to see your borders, and much easier to repair and get to the walls then for any maintenance as well. So yeah, it's working great.
Okay, because we did see in some other fields you could noticeably see how the ivy was gone off the walls that the goats in the fields are in. So they do like the ivy, they'll eat that away and keep your walls ivy free? Probably
their favourite is the ivy. They go to that first, and they do a really good job of even stripping the bark on the ivy, so it really pins back and reduces the growth of the ivy as well.
Oh, okay, excellent.
So it just goes to show, when you have a nature-friendly, enthusiastic farmer, what can be done. And we're really hoping, I suppose, that more get involved in the next round. Just when he mentioned the ivy there, we got some photos of, this is obviously the exact line. As you can imagine, the goats were on the left-hand side of that wall, and they had definitely eaten off all the ivy. It's full of antioxidants and vitamins, which is probably why they targeted it. Sometimes farmers can dislike ivy on walls because when the cattle are eating it and pulling it, they can pull the walls down. Goats obviously don't have that same impact as much. But ivy as well is amazing for biodiversity and wildlife and pollinators. So maybe if we could have a mix of both going forward, that would be great. And there's Fernando up on top of the wall, just demonstrating his abilities of being able to eat the ivy. So hopefully if there's more farmers can get involved in the next round, that'd be great. So back to the burn then. And what we looked at in the burn was cattle. Goats would probably be trialled in the burn as well, but at the moment, I suppose it's more the cattle that are creating the greatest impact here. So undergrazing is the main influence and risk when it comes to the loss of grassland diversity, especially in the uplands. And that's where it may be difficult to maintain boundaries with goats, wild goats, and extreme weather events. So we looked at different options, I suppose. And when you think of it, a lot of the time, the comments that were coming or the recommendations that were coming from the different schemes. So these would have been some of them from the burn program. They were talking about grazing it out. The management recommendations from the winterage cards, again, all refer to grazing. And it's the same with the grassland scorecards. Use stock to graze the field more evenly. A lot of the time we're asking farmers to graze it more evenly or graze it more. And obviously not giving them the options to be able to do that is difficult. So then enter virtual fencing. And you can see the images here where they're on the animals out in the burn. Refarm was a pilot scheme which was run last summer down here in the burn with about 20 farmers prior to the landscape actions coming on board for the acres scheme. And since that, the acres scheme, we have put in about 75 different plans with virtual fencing, which covers about 55 private fields and 5 commonage fields, and a total of just under 1,900 hectares of land has been covered. Training is also quite important, and I suppose training of both the animals and the farmer. So we undertook training this year in February, and we had both an indoor and outdoor session where we had 20 farmers from Annual Works Plan 1, where we brought them inside to give them a presentation on why we found it was ecologically really important for them to graze out these areas, and then brought them out into the field. And it was a local farmer who had used the collars before, and on a peer-to-peer learning explained how they worked on his farm, which worked really well. So the collars themselves, they are made up of a solar panel, a battery, a GPS transponder, and a chain. And these images are from No Fence, but like I said, there are other companies that offer a similar service. But they all operate, I suppose, with a mobile app. And the idea is that you draw a pasture to contain the animals by marking out a virtual fence boundary on your phone. And what that allows is for you to be able to see where your animals are in a real-time location of any of your collared animals across your farm. It works by musical cues and also electric shock. So as the animal moves closer to the fence, they get a musical cue, which tells them they are getting close to the fence and to move away. If they get too close to that virtual line, they will get an electric shock, which is similar to a mains fence. And then if they walk over that line, that is the end of the shocks. They get no further shocks once they've gone over the line, and they don't get any shock when they're coming back inside the line. So from an animal welfare point of view, it is equivalent to a mains electric fence, but the training is probably one of the most important aspects to its success. So there has to be a clear link between the audio cue and the pulse. Otherwise, animals can get unnecessarily shocked. And if they're receiving more than 30 shocks a day, something is definitely wrong. And I suppose the thing to emphasize is that they're not replacing human inspection. They're just allowing you to find them for human inspection, and definitely not mixing collared and non-collared animals, because obviously the non-collared animals will wander across a virtual fence line with no consequences, whereas a collared animal can't. So it does not replace human stock care. It's a supplement. So the training, like I said, is the most important thing. And to actually ensure that training is carried out successfully, what we have found from the pilot scheme is that picking a field close to your farm, so that you can go out and check them regularly. Having a mix of physical boundaries inside and outside. So putting your no fence boundary a good distance away from your physical fence, and ensuring that sometimes the GPS signal can be 5 to 6 meters off. So ensuring that it's not going to stop them going near something like a water trough, or in weather like this, a wall for shade or a forestry area for shade. So you fit your collars in a crush, making sure the batteries are fully charged. Ideally wait 48 hours for the animal to get used to wearing the collar. Put them out into the field, and then when they stop crossing that, when they stop coming near the boundary, or when they hear the sound, they stop and they turn around and back. That's when you know they're fully trained. So usually farmers have found that they understood the virtual boundaries within about 5 to 7 days. And this is just an image, I suppose, then of what you can get from no fence. An image, a video of it. And you can download this obviously to your phone, or you can see it in real time as to where your animals are. So each of those orange dots is a collared animal. And for you as a farmer, you can tell where your animals are. It also gives you e-mobile alerts if an animal is stuck in a hole or has it needs help. And it also tells you obviously when they've escaped, so when they've gone outside of that boundary. What we can tell from it is, I'm not sure if you've noticed, they haven't gone near this area of limestone on the top right-hand corner, and also this area of blackthorn on the bottom right. So I suppose for us, it gives us a lot of information as to where exactly the animals are targeting and what they're doing. So there was a participating farmer survey was carried out during refarm, and it asked, are they a gadget or are they a game changer? And this was asked under 4 different headings: hardware, app, cost, and usability. From a hardware point of view, none of the batteries or collars failed during the scheme, which was only for a few months. The battery life was good and it was still charged weeks later, and it took about 10 hours for a full charge. The app was easy to use. There was some reports of delays of updates or notifications, even in good signal areas. So sometimes it can take a while for them to say your animal is immobile or has escaped. The cost was an issue. It's €339 a collar to buy the collar, and then there's a €45 per year subscription. Farmers felt that the cost of the collar was not an issue, but the €45 a year subscription per collar is quite steep if you were using them on a number of animals. And the usability then, the use of the collars themselves, they found quite easy, but the ordering process was in some ways slow and cumbersome. But once they got them and got the hang of it, it was fine. So are they a gadget or a game changer? The collars are working as anticipated. It gives you a real-time location and works to a virtual fence as phone signal allows to tell you where your animal is. It does allow for labour saving and creates flexibility, and it does increase stock safety, especially with the e-mobility alerts. And a lot of farmers had reported it extended grazing by about 2 to 3 weeks in the area. So they overall gave it a 7 out of 10. It is a tool with potential and immediate benefit, and the tech aligns well with the ecological aims for the Burren landscape, which is just maintaining open, species-rich swards, keeping the community engaged and active, nature-friendly farming, and it might even be the return of the Burren bully. So the next steps, I suppose, are to review and research the data we have. So we have quite a number of farmers now that have these collars out. We have a bank of farmers that can maybe start using them for targeting. So the way the CP team went about it was to get farmers used to the technology first and used to using them. And now maybe we can start targeting certain areas, especially for ourselves, that we would like to target as well as the farmers. Annual Works Plan 3 is currently open. So if anybody is interested, they can certainly contact the team for putting in a plan. And yeah, expressions of interest are welcome from the farmers to the team. So do contact us. Our contact details are here. They're on our website. And yeah, you can get us in either the Karen office or out in Inisheer Monday to Friday. So the key messages, CP zones are obviously areas of key ecological interest. And the farming of these areas is key to their upkeep. So like I mentioned earlier about that 6,000 year tradition of grazing it, the more we can support farmers to keep grazing these areas, that's what keeps them alive ecologically and physically. And results-based agri-environmental schemes combined with new technology can certainly aid both ecological and agricultural interests in the areas. And that is me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joanne. Really enjoyed that presentation. Always great to see the imagery, such strong imagery of the Burren. So as Mícheál said, do send us your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Joanne, if you're okay to stop sharing, we can have a chat now about some of the, I suppose, the findings and the experience. It seemed to be generally positive. That 7 out of 10. It's pretty strong feedback coming through from the farmers locally. What's the general sort of view of this, and in terms of is this the future that people see for the Burren and the Aran Islands? This virtual fencing, replacing pretty much the harder boundaries that are there?
It certainly could, I suppose. And what has been seen from the Burren area is that with these larger winterage sites, it's certainly a tool that can help. That maintaining boundaries here can be difficult. These sites are just so big, and herding, which I'll let Aoife come in on, is better place to answer this question. Like the herding of these animals is quite difficult because the sites are so big. So it can be used as a tool, I suppose, to be able to locate where your herd is. But I don't know if you've anything else to add.
Yeah, I suppose definitely in terms of for targeted grazing in summertime, look, I suppose the wintages are for wintertime, and in wintertime you're used to going up and going herding and all the rest of it, and it's within your cycle. But in summertime, it's a little bit trickier to actually go and target graze those areas, because obviously you've a lot of other things going on the farm. You've breeding going on, you might be at silage, there's a lot of different elements, and trying to separate maybe a bunch of 4 or 5 cows that you need to put up to do the targeted grazing, there's a lot of extra work in that and all the rest of it. Whereas when you have the collars on them, it does make it a lot easier that you can go up, you can keep an eye on them on your phone there. I have cows out targeted grazing at the moment, and I check them there when Joanne was doing her presentation, it gives me a real-time update. I know where they are. So they're very, very useful in terms of that. And then I suppose within those larger sites, as Joanne said, there's areas that you want to graze. You don't want them going into areas where there isn't high areas or high levels of millennia, where they're quite species rich. There might be lighter areas. You want them to go in and target those millennia areas. So being able to actually fence them into that area, it's very, very beneficial in terms of that. They really, really do have their benefits.
The farmer you interviewed, Joanne, he seemed pretty tuned in from a tech point of view. He was very capable from that point of view. Has that presented any challenges, let's say, for people who aren't as familiar with these types of technologies or mobile phones and so on?
Absolutely, yeah. And look, it's the same as anything. I still get calls from my dad, who's 75, as to what WhatsApp is on his phone, and it's the same for this. It is an app. It is a technology. It does need a certain amount of, technologically minded abilities, I suppose, where you need to be able to go on to order them and then download the app and then draw everything on the app. They found in Refarm with the 20 farmers, and there was a mix, I suppose, of older and younger farmers. And once the farmer was set up, once that initial pain had been taken, they were, they learned quite quickly. But there's certainly a barrier initially, all right. And that's where I suppose the team come in. And like I said, that peer-to-peer learning down here that can be shared.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, if this takes off, maybe there might be some stronger purchasing power there amongst the farmers, if this is something that becomes popular, because we know that, there's numbers matter in these types of things. Mícheál, some good questions coming through there.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of congratulations, Ran, because there's a lot of compliments coming through here with the questions, so that's always a good thing.
Excellent.
I suppose you might just discuss there, we'll say, the funding for the collars through the landscape actions, or how the landscape actions work in practicality. I suppose one of the points you made there, the collars are 339 each, and then €45 per year per collar. So that's probably something people will look at But in terms of the funding for someone that's in acres, what's their first step if they wanted to go for this system?
I'll let you take that, Aoife.
Yeah, so the very first thing that you'd want to do is contact us here in the team. What we do is we'd have a look at your site and see, are you suitable for collars, first of all? Because, someone who's maybe a big open Greenland farm, you're not really going to be overly suitable for the collars in terms of applying for under the landscape actions. But look, if you have somewhere that is suitable for the collars, it's definitely something that we'll have a look at it and we'll try and include for it. So the funding under the acres, it's €404 per collar. So it just about covers the purchase of the collar and your first year's subscription with no fence. And then I suppose after that, then that you have to pay the subscription costs out of your own pocket. Now, what they do is it depends on how much time period of the year that you're using the collars for. So if you're only using them for, let's say, 3 months of the year, you can actually sign up with no fence to just pay a monthly subscription. I think it's €5 per month on the monthly prescription. So basically, when you're not using the collars, you just take the batteries out of them, and that tells no fence or whatever company you're using that the collars are no longer in use, and then you don't get the charge for them. What we also do as well, as Joanne mentioned in her presentation, is we encourage all farmers to just attend training. So before they go off and make a purchase of the collar. So in our plans that we put through for about somewhere between 5 and 6 collars per farmer, just because there's no point. Rome wasn't built in a day. There's no point someone going off buying 20 collars and not being able to use them. So just very trial them on a small basis, 4 or 5. So that's what we would put in your first plan, and you'd see how you get on with them. But we do encourage everyone to come to training first before any collars are purchased. Just to come, we have a couple of local farmers, as Joanne said, who are using the collars. They can then present show how the actual collars works, because not all farms are going to be suitable, or they're, as we spoke about, they're older farmers who just might be back to the button phones or whatever it is, and they're just not going to work for them. So if they come to the training, at least then they get an idea of what's actually involved. So when we're putting in for a plan, we put in for training as well. So you're going to get paid for coming to your 3 hours training. It's €125. And then look, if you do want to go ahead and purchase the collars, then you can go ahead and purchase them. But yeah, if you want to do it through acres, contact your local DP team, and they'll assess it from there and put a plan through for you.
And just in the presentation there, it was mentioned, we'll say the non-collared animals, if you had them in the herd or in the flock, that they can go outside the boundary.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Because as we all know, all animals really, but cattle in particular, they're herd animals. They'll follow the herd. So if you've 2 or 3 cows there and they're going over the boundary line, the other cattle, they're going to follow them by instinct as well. And that, so it's very, very important that they're not ran together. And even in terms of the training, this is my second year using the collars. I've had 3 heifers last year who had the collars on them. They're in calf heifers this year. I put the collars back on them again. They got 1 or 2 audio warnings each. They never got a shock. They actually remembered their training, because I was training them with 3 animals who hadn't used the collars before. So they're actually very, very intelligent, that once they kind of get trained properly once, they seem to remember it. So once they know that collar's on their neck and they hear the audios, they realize, right, if I go any further, I'm going to get a shock. So it's actually quite easy to train them, but it's not a runner to be mixing the different types of animals, because you won't train them right. And if you don't train them right, day one, you're going to end up with problems, because they won't, no matter how many shocks they get, if they don't understand it, they're not going to comply.
And I suppose one of the questions that came in, you were saying there, we said there's 189 fields, or 7,500 hectares, I think was the figure identified for undergrazing. So obviously you're going to target the animals in those areas. Could this potentially work in other areas that have been overgrazed as an exclusion zone?
Absolutely.
Is that possible?
If you were running them on maybe perhaps big open commonages or something like that, and if there are areas that you can absolutely fence them out, because there might be a corner of, we'll say maybe a peatland commonage or something that's been very, very tightly grazed or whatever, and you can draw a boundary, you can decide wherever you're going. And even in terms of, we'll say, not so much here in the Burren, but like I know in other sites where they've been used, like in a commonage type sites, there might be a certain area that you want to put the cattle into, but there's a big bog hole in the middle of it. You can actually fence off an exclusion area within your area that you fenced in, so that you can say, well, look, I don't want to let the cattle in there into that particular area. You can do that with the collar. So they're quite intelligent in that way in what you can fence areas in and out of.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, going by the amount of questions we're getting here, Mark, it's definitely something we have to be looking at more. There's plenty of interest in it. There's questions here. I suppose we've looked at the goats are after generating great interest in terms of scrub control. Question here, if they work on goats, do they work for sheep? Is it a possibility?
Yeah, I think no offense, I've been trialing them at the moment on sheep. I think, I know with the goats, you do have to shave their necks, and you have to shave the sheep's necks as well when you're using them. I think at the moment, the GPS in some of the sites that they've been using them in, they weren't fantastic for the sheep collar. So I don't think they've fully got off the ground yet, but that they're definitely something they're doing quite an amount of research in at the moment. Look, they've only mastered the cow side of it there in the last 4 or 5 years. So I think now they're moving on to the next side. But they seem to work quite well, Joanne, from speaking to Finn out in the islands, don't they, for the goats?
Yeah, no, for the goats, they're certainly working. I suppose, Mícheál, as well, like Aoife was saying about having collared and non-collared stock, oftentimes with sheep, the stock numbers are just so high. And if you need to put a collar in each sheep, that just gets too expensive. And like you've said about trying to make sure that there's a connection between the collar and their skin. So yeah, it's certainly something they're looking into for sheep, but it's not something that we are interested down here in the Burren. But from the goats, I suppose, largely if you have 4 to 5 goats in an area for the 60 days, that seems to be enough to target graze what you need. They will, like you saw in the video, they'll eat that the new foliage on briars and especially blackthorn. And then if you go in and mulch it and they keep eating it down, it can be really good for that. And I know in other zones as well, they're using it for invasive species in some zones. It's not what we're doing, but yeah, it seems to be a huge thing. I know that Fionn was saying he bought 5 collars because he had one spare. He didn't have one on the kid because the kid just stayed with its mother, and it was about €1,300. So it's a significant outlay, I suppose. But if it can be at least even trialed in this round, it gives a great basis for anything that could come in the next round.
Yeah, it's a very interesting technology, and look at it. It's something that came across in the presentation. I don't know, did everyone else pick up on it? But the Aran Islands that you deal with, you've small fields. It's a large network, but I suppose it's different to the mainland in that even if you did control the scrub, the brash control afterwards is something you have to contend with. So that's really where the goats come into play. It's
been a huge issue. And, we've discussed that a few times, I suppose, in our steering meetings, that previously, and I know that day is gone, but previously they would have burned the brash, back in kind of older schemes and whatnot, and burning down that brash material and then using that as almost a fertilizer again. But yeah, obviously you can't burn green waste anymore, but then practically out in the islands, what do you do with it? And when you actually think of what you can do with it, in most places you can, like in the Burren, in these huge areas, you can just pile it in one place and it actually becomes a biodiversity hotspot because it is of itself an area for wildlife. But out in the Aran Islands, the fields are just so small that if you pile it in one place, you're actually just moving the problem from one place to the other. We've looked at a few different options of like mulching that material or bringing it down to one central facility and getting it kind of mulched with bigger machines, but it's getting it out of these areas. We go out and score the Aran Islands every year, and I have to admit, jumping walls is bad enough with just us and a tablet, but if you were trying to come over it with bushes and stuff, it's just too difficult. So from an island point of view, it just works really well to be able to keep that all on site.
Yeah.
And sorry, Mark.
I was just going to say, look, I've seen those goats in action. They're pretty agile when it comes to stone walls. It's amazing to see them. I've been over there with the Inishmore with is it Gabriel far
Yes.
to he's milking goats there, so it's incredible to see how they don't really respect any boundaries unless you
No,
have the
they're built for
collars.
they're built for the landscape, in fairness, yeah. And it's
Yeah,
quite difficult to, somebody did say to us, if you were considering getting a goat, you need to be comfortable with the idea of it standing on your neighbour's car. And
yes,
that you could
yes.
find a goat anywhere, but that's why these
Mm.
collars are so useful, that at least once they are trained, and like Aoife said, once they respect that boundary, they can be kept into any location without having to
Yeah.
have dinosaur fencing to keep them in.
So same around us, a good way to get to know your neighbours.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely,
but
yeah.
just maybe stepping back and looking at the overall objectives of the project. This is a managed landscape. Increasing biodiversity is probably the main, and maintaining it is probably the main objective, alongside obviously the farming and the community there. How well are we, or where are we on that journey to restoring the landscape, and the overall progress in relation to the scoring side of things as well?
I suppose in the Burren, we're quite lucky in that we've had an agri-environmental scheme here for the last 25 years. And I suppose there is a deep knowledge and pride with what goes on here. And I suppose we're slightly different here in the Burren, is that we are just maintaining, because it is the farmers that create the landscape. And they are the custodians of the land that are grazing. So like I said in my presentation, it's the grazing and it's the farming that keeps that species rich grassland. So from our point of view here in the Burren, we just need to keep people farming, try and make it as easy as possible, because obviously there is, issues with trying to get farms passed on to people. And then if people are working off farm, farmers having the time and making it economically advantageous for them to actually farm the land. So possibly it's unusual here in the Burren, but it's keeping the farmers here to do what they've always done, to provide that ecological haven and the species rich grassland in the area. That's our main goal. So like in our local action plan, we just want to be able to increase the grazing and ensure that the farmers are still here to do that very important role.
Aoife, I know I've seen you many years heading up the hills with the cows. I presume that'll be happening again later on in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. October, November will come around, and it'll be time to do that. Yeah. So look, it is, as Joanne said, it is very important, and any new technologies that can come along and that can support, farming and can make it a little bit easier. And I know Joanne spoke about Refarm, the private funding project that's in the Burren. There was 20 pilot farmers brought on board for that, and I'd say probably 12 or 13 of them are probably under 40 years of age. So it's fantastic to see in terms of that, and it really is supporting. And most of those farmers are all working off farm as well. So, so the things like the collars, if it just makes life a little bit easier, in terms of trying to locate animals, everything helps.
I suppose particularly in the context of a lot of farmers are probably working part-time, and the time availability to go herding and shepherding animals is quite limited. So you're getting the best of both worlds here, really.
Absolutely, yeah, and you know that you can use them, and and especially in the winter time. I know we've had a couple of farmers who've very huge sites, and then might have just stuck a collar on a couple of the animals, and it just helps them to know where they are on the site, and little things like that. If it saves you an hour in a day, isn't it fantastic?
There's probably a lot of practical hidden benefits like that, Aoife, that I know from walking farms for acres, some of the larger fields, you could be walking a long time before you find animals. So for someone that's coming home after work in the evening wanting to do the herding, it's a big benefit. Are there issues around coverage, or how does the collar work? How does it link?
So it is. So you need basically minimum 3G for the collars to work. So what we would have done is we would have tested a lot of the sites. There's a Vodafone coverage map, and it gives you a fair idea. Or look, if you talk to the farmer, can you make a phone call from that field? If they say yes, if they say no, you have a fair idea. I actually have an issue in one spot where I've the virtual fence line drawn. I don't know what the issue is that there's absolutely no coverage, or is it tree lines in that spot, and the signal drops, so the cattle go past the boundary and they don't actually get notified that they're leaving. No, the way around that is just to readjust the boundary line. So we had one or two little issues with that, but you definitely do need to have some coverage to have connectivity, because if they don't have connectivity to some kind of a coverage, they don't work fantastically well. So if you're in an absolute black spot, no coverage, they're just not going to be an option for you. Unfortunately, just have to have some bit of connectivity.
But it definitely for the majority of areas, it's a great alternative to going out with permanent stakes and wire.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Some sites they can even be dangerous to fence. Just as questions coming in, there's great interest in it. On the refarm project, or we'll say the engagement you have through landscape actions on the virtual fencing and scrub control, do you have an age profile of the farmers, or is there any standard, we'll say?
Yeah, so I suppose what we would have done with some of the last round of collars is, as Joanne said, we'd have looked at areas that needed to be target grazed. So we would have contacted the farmers, regardless of age, I suppose, and just to talk them through. To be honest with you, when you pick up the phone, you ring someone, you have a fair idea what the age profile is. Can they use Dundee? Can they get onto the marsh? If they can do those two things, they're probably in line for collars. If they can't, we're probably going nowhere. But in terms of that, definitely, Joanne, I think you'd agree, there's definitely an uptick with some of the younger farmers and kind of more, the technology savvy farmers, that would have came forward for it. We've definitely seen a little bit more of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the same for the goats, yeah, because Fionn, I suppose, out on the islands, it's his father, he's herding for his father. So a lot of the time as well, if there's like an older farmer, or they don't even have to be older, to be honest, just if they don't have that technological kind of background, they usually drag in some sort of child somewhere, or son or daughter, to be able to do the technological side of it. Yeah.
And just Joanne, you mentioned there in your presentation, the average field score for grassland and Galway Clear, I think, was 4.7 out of 10. Yep. So just in terms of those farms, you might just talk about the NPIs, how they apply, when the dates are.
Yep. Yeah, so exactly. So the MPIs are open at the moment, and they're put in by your farm advisor. So if any farmers on the call want to do any of those MPIs, they're divided down. I suppose the MPIs are like the infrastructure, habitat and wildlife support, like tree planting, and the MPI for scrub control is just with chainsaw or hand tools. And they're open now. Contact your farm advisor, and that's going to close on the 14th of October. When it closes, the CP team will get an export of all that data, and we screen them. And then we're hoping, I suppose, then to have letters out if they come from the department. Once we finish our screening, it goes back to the department, and we are hoping to have those letters out as soon as possible, so that people can actually get that work done. But like I said, it could be the last round for MPIs for especially tranche 1 farmers. So if there is anything, there's a list of them on our website, or contact your farm advisor or the CP team for any information on them. But yeah, if there's something you want to do or you had planned to do, then now is the time to get it in. And once you get your letter back out, you'll have until September or October next year to get that work done. So it's better to have it in. There's no compulsion on you either to do that work, but it's better have it in and screened and at least available to you if you do have the time.
Right. Well, we're just coming up on time, I'm afraid. I don't know where that hour went. It's 29 minutes past now. But look, I want to say a big, huge thank you to you, Joanne, for a really excellent presentation. Aoife, thanks so much for giving your perspective as the agriculturalist and I suppose the farmer as well. So it's really important. Obviously, farmers are central to the success of this project and all agri-environmental programs across the country. Mícheál, thanks very much for helping out with the questions, and I know you're heavily involved in this in the background as well. Next week, we're going to be joined by Michael Martin, who is Senior Inspector with the Environmental Protection Agency, and he's going to be talking to us about the National Agricultural Inspection Programme, which is focused on water quality. So I think that will be very interesting, particularly in the context of the Nitrates Directive and nitrates derogation. So I'm sure there'll be lots of interest in that topic. So until next week, thanks for watching.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.